And I try to fill in the big blanks in history and the present blanks that you're not given by the mainstream media, to show you how you're simply living through a script planned long ago and played by all parties, because all parties really take their orders from the same source, towards a common goal which they're bringing into place right now. Tonight, I'm going to show you some of how this agenda we're going through works. You can't do an awful lot in an hour, that's the unfortunate thing. And there's so much history to it, and so many names and organizations and connections and histories of the connections between the cooperating organizations that run our lives. Going way back so far, as I say, you would take volumes and volumes of just reading through them to understand them. And I have done a lot of this myself over many, many years. And what happens now is simply a new phase. And I'll be talking about what's happening in Britain right now with the election, what happened, and what's declared in newspapers are the amazing new changes that have to come into place in Britain. And I'll explain what these changes really are, because the media isn't really explaining what's behind it, who planned it, or all the agreements that have already been signed towards it. But to the general public, it'll sound kind of wonderful, kind of like a reenactment of the hippie era, where there was a sense of excitement and change generated by the media, and even from government at the top, and even from the conservatives, such as the BBC, as they call them, which really is anything but conservative. It's internationalist. And these guys work towards a world society. A world society they seldom talk to about, at least to the public. And it's so intertwined with so many different departments, special departments working together towards a particular type of society. But it will give the appearance of a socialist society. We've been going through the changes for that since the 50s, and speeding up in the 60s, and then the massive welfare state part of it, then the plundering of the banks part of it. And the banks always stay supreme, because they will continue under the next phase as well, which is commutatorianism, it's called. Commutatorianism is an idea which is based, really, when you compare it to what it looks like, is the Soviet model, where people live in their communities, you all participate in civic society, you do voluntary work when you're told to, and supposedly you get the right to decide what happens in your community. All sounds rather wonderful, but in reality, like the Soviet Union, it wasn't run that way at all. Because you'll find the head ones are appointed, or they're already trained for their positions, coming out from you, appearing as you, and taking over the leadership positions. You'll find groups like Common Purpose are doing this. Now, there's a coalition government there that happens in Britain sometimes, where you can have two parties that were neck and neck, and they share power for 4 years. So they're going to take 5-year run at it this time, it says here. And you have conservatives, supposedly, which are not conservatives, and you have liberal Democrats, which are not really liberal Democrats. When you look at the conservative liberal Democrat government coalition, they put out something called Building the Big Society. They've come together with a driving ambition to put more power and opportunity into people's hands. We want to give citizens, communities and local governments the power and information they need to come together, solve the problems they face and build the Britain they want. That'll be the day when the people build something they want. They get taxed on it. I'll be back with more and explain this to you and dissect it after this break. Hi folks, this is Alan Watt. We're cutting through the matrix, reading this big society that's supposed to be brought in, starting again with the flagship Britain. This is how it always goes, because Britain has always been the flagship for this New World Order. And the plans were hatched there too, in London, long, long ago. And Carroll Quigley documented a lot of it in his book Tragedy and Hope, and his other one, The Anglo-American Establishment. Showed you how the wars came about and showed you how these guys were behind the setting up of wars and of conflict for geopolitical reasons. Not only to change the world as such, but also to change societies and the cultures of the societies as well. But to go on with their big society and building it, it says, only when people in communities are given more power and take more responsibility can we achieve fairness and opportunity for all. Building the big society isn't just the responsibility of just one or two departments. It's the responsibility of every department of government and the responsibility of every citizen too. Government on its own cannot fix every problem. I'll skip that part. But we're all in this together. There's this famous line right again from the movie Brazil, the comedy Totalitarian movie, which basically showed you a society of total centralization, all data collection and so on. And the slogans were everywhere. You're under a big war all the time against terrorists that no one ever sees. And the slogans are always, we are all in this together. You'll hear that through every war, you see. We need to draw on the skills and expertise of people across the country as we respond to the social, political, and economic challenges Britain faces. This document outlines the already agreed policies, that we believe will help make that possible. It's the first strand of a comprehensive program for government to be published in the coming days, which will deliver the forum, or the reform, renewal, fairness, and change Britain needs. So there, once again, they're telling you what it needs. Politicians are telling you what you need. Give communities more powers. Now, you better sit and think about that. Because remember what I said before, the blend that was to come out of the Soviet Western Pact, according to Norman Dodds, was a combination of the two together. I've always told you it'd be a fascist bunch on the top, living high off the hog. You're all the hogs, of course. That's how they talk about us. And down below, the people live in the little communities where everything is shared. Also, if you go into it deeper, it would mean the end of all private property and private business ownership. Technically, your community is going to own all this stuff. But of course, you don't see it in this particular little part here. It says we will radically reform the planning system to give neighbourhoods far more ability to determine the shape of the places in which their inhabitants live. We'll introduce new powers to help communities save local facilities. You see, so you will be left with the burden after building hospitals and all the rest of it and watching them being sold off. You'll be given the burden of keeping them going. And if you can't keep them going, well, you're going to blame the government. They'll say, well, you're in charge of it, you people there. Well, you're just not producing enough that's your problem. Deal with it. Facilities and services threatened with closure, and give communities the right to bid to take over local state-run services. The sharing of massive taxes locally. That means too. Of course, you'll still have federal ones as well. We will train a new generation. This is the part that interests me because it's right out of the techniques and the wording of the Chatham House Group, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, because their whole idea in every generation they've been doing it, you see, for 100 years, is to train certain people from childhood to be local and governmental leaders, as is their organization too, that's called Common Purpose. So they'll train a new generation of community organisers and support the creation of neighbourhood groups across the UK, especially in the most deprived areas. Encourage people to take an active role in their communities. Remember I told you one day if you don't turn up at a community event, they'll be coming looking for you. What's wrong? Are you antisocial? I've said that over and over for years. We will take a range of measures to encourage volunteering and involvement in social action, including launching a national Big Society Day and making regular community involvement a key element of civil service staff appraisals. You know, for years and years and years, they've been retiring federal civil servants and scatting them across the countries. And they start up the little NGO groups. They become rather big and popular. That's how your environmental groups got started, folks. By semi-retired or retired top civil servants across. It's happened here in Canada. I watched it happen. I followed them. I traced them. I watched what was going on. We will take a range of measures to encourage charitable giving and philanthropy. So you'll be blended in your communitarian groups with the George Soroses of the world, you see, and the Bill Gates and all these philanthropies, because after all, they're all part of the foundations that have always been the parallel government or worked for them and created the NGOs and funded them. We will introduce a national citizen service. Right? A national citizen service. This initial flagship project will provide a program for 16-year-olds to give them a chance to develop the skills needed to be active and responsible citizens. So once again, you see, you're being taught there. You'll be taught as you go through these courses what kind of citizen they're talking about, because they've already got a pre-mixed idea, a conceived idea. It'll be different from yours, I can guarantee you. Mixed with peoples from different backgrounds, you see, for the global society, and start getting involved in their communities. It's going to be mandatory eventually to get any work if you're not involved in your community and you're politically correct. Remember, the Soviet means ruled by councils. Their charter sounded wonderful in theory. But of course, the big boys put on their own leaders on top of the NGOs that represent you in your community, and the people get the dregs at the end of the economy. Transfer power from central to local government. Promote the radical devolution of power and greater financial autonomy to local government, including a full review of local government finance. Well, how much of the debt are they going to slap on these emerging new little communities? Because they're not going to write that off. We will give councils a general power of competence. We'll abolish regional spatial strategies and return decision-making powers on housing and planning to local councils. You'll have to be belonging to the proper cliques to get anything done, just like it was in the Soviet Union. Support co-ops, mutuals, charities, and social enterprises. Support the creation of an expansion of mutuals, cooperatives, charities, and social enterprises, and support these groups to have much greater involvement in running of public services. Give the public sector workers a new right to form employee-owned cooperatives. You see, it's cooperative. That's how it's going to be, folks. No private business. And bid to take over the services they deliver. This will empower millions of public sector workers to become their own boss and help them to deliver better services or right. Use funds from the dormant bank accounts to establish a big society bank which will provide new finance for neighborhood groups, charities, social enterprises, and other non-governmental bodies, NGOs, you see. Publish government data with a new right to data so that government-held data sets can be requested and used by the public and then published on a regular basis. Oblige the police to publish detailed local crime data statistics. They're already doing that in Britain, by the way. See, they're already underway with all this stuff before they actually come out and announce it. There's websites up in Britain where you can actually look in to see the worst crime areas and what it is that day and so on. So the public can get proper information about crime in their neighborhoods and hold the police to account for their performance. You see? Communitarianism. And what do they stand for, communitarianism? Well, the NGOs have been formed long ago for them by, again, big foundations in the US, Canada, across the British Commonwealth countries, and Britain itself. And it says communitarianism, an idea and movement in politics, says this: with the demise of true socialism as a viable intellectual force, communitarianism is now the most active philosophical opposition to libertarianism.